Okay, this is the video tutorial for Project 2 for Audio 2. You'll find it in Learning Module 2, so if you click on the project icon, you can see the instructions and download the instructions, but the idea basically is to create about a 30-second piece of music that can be used as an underscore behind some audio or video project that you may be doing, either real or hypothetical. And by the way, it doesn't have to sound like this. It doesn't have to have the same instrumentation. It can be anything you want. This is totally a creative project. So if you don't want to use drums or instead of keyboard, if you want to use something else, anything you want to do is going to be fine on this. The important thing is that it have a good beginning, a good ending, and it can work as an underscore. And GarageBand is a quick and easy way to create a royalty-free piece of music that you can use as an underscore in one of your productions. Unlike all the other projects in Audio 2 where we'll be using the Adobe suite, we're not going to use that for this particular project because nothing in the Adobe suite supports MIDI. This doesn't necessarily have to be done with MIDI, but that's the easiest way to do it. And we're going to be using GarageBand. If you have a Mac, you should have GarageBand. It comes free with Macs. If you don't have a Mac, if you have a PC or Chromebook or some other operating system, there are other programs you can use. There's a program called Pro Tools First, which is free. You can actually download that, and that does have some MIDI support. Unfortunately, Audacity does not have any MIDI support. But assuming you have a Mac and you have GarageBand, you can either click on the GarageBand icon if you already have it on the dock, or if not, go to the Applications folder, find the latest version of GarageBand, and then open it from there. And this window will pop up, and you'll have a choice of creating a new project. They call it an empty project, or adding onto an existing project. So let's just create an empty project or a new project. Then this window pops up and says, okay, what kind of a track do you want to create? You have 4 choices. There's a MIDI track, a couple of live tracks, if you want to sing along or talk along, or plug a microphone in and play along. Then there are the yellow tracks. They indicate drum tracks. They're pre-recorded drums, which actually work really well. In fact, the one nice thing about GarageBand, just like a lot of programs used to come with clip art, GarageBand comes with a lot of usable clips. And we're going to create a piece using almost entirely these clips. So even if you don't play piano, even if you're not a musician, you don't know a note of music, don't fear, you don't need to. This program will let you create stuff just by dragging and dropping, which is pretty cool. I'm going to select the drummer one because it's always nice to start with drums. That gives you a nice click track. There is a click track in GarageBand, but you don't need to use it if you have the drummer there. So all I did was click on the drummer icon there, and immediately this SoCal Kyle track was created. And you'll notice there at the bottom of the screen, it lets you pick a bunch of presets. And you can select different ones. You can also select whether you want to feature like the ride cymbals or the hi-hat, or maybe some additional percussion like tambourine or maracas or hand claps. And you can play with a lot of parameters. I mean, it's fine just out of the box the way it is, but if you want to play around with it, you can have fun and do that. These are some of the drum licks that you can pick. I think the half pipe was the default, but I picked Crash the Party. Notice, too, the layout of GarageBand. Unlike most other workstations where you have an edit window and mix window, GarageBand puts everything on one window. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of the page there, the 3 icons you see there, the one on the left is Notepad, the one in the middle are loops, and those are the ones we'll be using almost exclusively, and the one on the right is the media browser. And along the top, closer to the center of the screen, you'll see these buttons. The 1, 2, 3, 4 is the count-off if you're actually recording something that gives you 4 beats lead in, and then the one that looks like a metronome, that's the metronome. And you would use that if you didn't have a drum track, but if you have a drum track, you probably don't need the metronome track. By the way, Audition has a metronome button that looks almost exactly like this too, and you can turn it on and off. So if you go to the upper right-hand corner of the GarageBand window and you click on the loops, you can actually search by instrument, genre, or descriptors. And instruments is probably an easy way to do it. And I usually start out with drum kits. I know we've got a drum track on there already, but we may want to add to it. So I'm going to click on the Kits button below all drums. And when I do that, I can see I have a whole bunch of choices. By the way, if you're not seeing any of these, you may not have downloaded all of the sound files. When you install GarageBand, you have to actually download all the sound clips. There are 2 types of files in the sound library. The blue files are sampled clips, and the green files are MIDI. Now, the sound quality is about the same on both. I don't really hear much of a difference. The MIDI gives you some editing capability, but they both work well. So I chose one of the MIDI drums, the 70s Street drum set number 15, and I'll drag that onto the timeline. And notice they're playing together. They're right now at a tempo of 110, but we can change that. It's very easy. You just click on the tempo with the mouse and you can drag up or down and it'll change the tempo higher or lower. Typically, most of these MIDI programs start out at 120 as a base tempo. This one started out at 110 because I think that was the natural tempo of that first drum track that we brought in. You'll notice too, if I click on the little scissors icon there in the upper left, that basically opens an edit window at the bottom of the screen, and I can look at the MIDI drums and I can actually see the notes, and I can change those if I want. I can't really change the original drum track, the one in yellow, that same way, but because the other one is MIDI, I can do some manipulation if I want. By the way, if you happen to see a yellow bar at the top of the timeline, that indicates a loop boundary. And you can get that by clicking and dragging from one side to the other, and you can set up an area that will continuously loop, and that can be very helpful. To clear that, though, you click on the loop button, which is just to the right of the record button in the header at the top of the screen. I'd like to extend that green drum track there on track 2. It's only 1 bar long, and I'd like to make it as long as the other track. So I'm going to just grab the end, it's like a trimmer tool, and I can click and drag with that and extend it to the right so it's as long as I want it to be. So that I can get a good idea how long this track really is, I can change the time display on the screen from measures to seconds by going down to time, and that will change. So I'd like to have both of these end somewhere around 30 seconds, so I'm going to drag the MIDI track back to 30, then I'm going to do the same thing with the yellow drum track. I'm going to drag that out to the right up to about 30 seconds. Just ballpark, it doesn't have to be exactly. We're going to work on getting a good ending here on these in a bit. Notice in the track header section, like you would see in Adobe Audition, there's the description of the track, whatever the track is, the name of the track, and they even put a little icon, which is helpful. Next to that, there's a mute button. There's a solo button, which looks like the little headphones. There's the track fader, basically the volume fader, and a pan pot. It comes up centered, but we can pan it left or right if we want. So I'm going to go back to the loops window in the upper right. I'm going to click the X, which is going to clear the selections out. Then I'm going to go to basses, which is about halfway down in that third column. And that's going to bring up all the basses, all the clips that I have that are basses. Again, just like with the drums, I have both green and blue. The green are the MIDI, the blue are the sampled files. I can edit the green a little bit more, but they both sound comparable. And really, you don't need to do any editing. As long as you like the clip, you just use it. So I picked the cool upright bass, which is one of the sampled selections. It's one of the blue files, and I moved that out onto the timeline. It made its own track automatically, just like it would in Audition, and I'm all set to go. Notice that it's playing perfectly with the drum track. Then I'm going to place the tool at the end of that track on the right side of the file, and I'm going to drag it to the right to extend it out to about 30 seconds. So it ends just about where the drum tracks end. Then I'm going to go back to the loops window. I'm going to click the X to clear the find, and I'm going to select pianos. And that gives me my choice of pianos. Again, I have both blue and green. I'm going to pick the one that says Skyline, maybe because I'm hungry for chili, but that seems like it might work. And I'm going to drag that out onto the timeline, and it's going to make its own track. By the way, even with the blue tracks, the sample tracks, there's still some editing you can do. In fact, if you want to do auto-tune, if you record your voice, select limit the key and move the pitch correction to 100%. And you can actually create kind of an auto-tune effect, which is kind of cool on your voice if you want to do that. So we'll drag the piano track out to about 30 seconds so that it ends with the bass and the drums. And notice how the piano track sounds like it was made for the bass and drums. They play together very well. So just for fun, I'm going to select woodwinds from the loops column, and I'm going to add a couple of different woodwind files there. And you almost can't go wrong with these. Just about anything you select should work fairly well. Because these are MIDI files, I can go in if I want. I can change the notes a little bit to work with the tonality of the piano a little bit better, and I did that. On both the flute and the oboe, I changed a couple of notes. But you don't have to do that. That's just one of the things you can do with MIDI. What's nice about MIDI is if you're playing a part and you happen to screw something up, you don't have to do the whole thing over again. You can keep it, go in, and just fix those notes really easily. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and add a keyboard track. So I'm going to go Track, New Track, and I'm going to select the one that shows the keyboard. It's the green one. It actually defaults to the electric piano, but I can go back and I can change that to something else. And in fact, I don't have to have a MIDI keyboard. I can use the computer keyboard I have. And to do that, you go under Window and then Show Musical Typing. And I have two choices. I can actually see a MIDI type keyboard, or I can actually see the QWERTY type keyboard where the letters are actually the notes on the keyboard. You have about an octave there, but you can put it in a different octave. You can do all kinds of things to make this work. And it's polyphonic, so you can play right from your computer keyboard. So on the column on the left, I'm going to change that from a standard electric piano to one of the arpeggiated synth sounds. And what's nice about this is I can just hold my fingers down on keys and it'll kind of arpeggiate based on the tempo of the song and move between notes. And it sounds like I'm playing hot licks and I'm just holding 2 or 3 notes down. So to record MIDI using GarageBand, highlight the track you want to record. Hit the return key to go back to the beginning of the timeline. Then just simply press R. And you'll hear the 1, 2, 3, 4 count off, and you can start playing. By the way, on any of the MIDI tracks, you can show the notes, what they call piano roll, where you see actually it looks like the MIDI notes, or you can actually see sheet music, which is kind of cool. So if I want to generate sheet music that I can actually print out, you can do that as well. So the next thing I'd like to do is to give this an ending. A piece is always much more usable if it has both a strong beginning and a strong ending. That way you can use it as the open of the piece and you can bring it back as the close of the piece, and it works both ways. And the best way to do that is to go close to where you want to end it. This doesn't have to be exactly 30 seconds, but I'm going to go as close as I can get to 30 seconds, and I'm going to try to find a beat that I can just end it on. It's also helpful to automate some things on this. So I'm going to go to the Mix menu and go Show Automation, or I can simply hit the A key, A as in Apple, and that will show me the automation bars just like I would see in Audition. The yellow bar for volume, but I can see all the other automation parameters as well. Echo, reverb, EQ, and all these other things. At this point, I'm going to just do the volume. And what I'm going to do is on that last note, I'm going to right-click on the volume line and put a couple of node points there that I can actually bend this up or down, and so make it actually accent that final note on the drums. If you don't have a right click, then do a control click, and that'll give you the right click feature. You can see I did this on the drums, then went down to the bass and the keyboard tracks and kind of goosed up that last note so it's accented a little bit more, and then did a fade out so that it sounds like the note ends, and that's the ending of the piece. I didn't really need to do that to the woodwinds track because I didn't carry the woodwinds out to the end. By the way, it's not necessary to have every instrument playing all the way from beginning to end. I had the arpeggios in for about 4 bars and then let them stay out for 4 bars and brought them in again for 4 bars. That adds some variety to the track. I also didn't extend the woodwinds to the very end of the track either. Doing that makes the track sound a little less like a loop and more like a regular piece that might have been played that way. So in addition to volume and pan and some other things, I can also automate just about every other parameter as you would in Audition. To make the piano sound more like an ending there, I'm going to add some reverb at the tail of the piano. On the piano track, I'm going to select reverb for the automation parameter and then bring it up at the end there. At the top of the screen, you'll also see the master fader. It's about 2/3 of the way to the right on the top header there. You also can see the audio meters underneath the fader. You want to make sure the meters aren't stuck in the red, but you want to make sure you're using most of the full scale so you're getting all the bits. You can pull the master fader down, you can pull the individual faders down. The meters aren't quite as nice as they would be in Audition, but they work. So now how do you export this thing? How do you get this into a file that you can actually upload? Because unlike Audition or Logic or Audacity or Pro Tools or many of the other DAWs, what GarageBand does is flattens all the files into one file. In fact, at the end of this whole process, you'll only have one file to worry about. It'll be a .band file. There won't be an audio files folder. There won't be a session file backups folder. Everything is compressed into one file, the same way it would be in PowerPoint, for example, where you're adding videos or sound clips or pictures. Everything just gets flattened into one file. Well, in some ways, that's nice. But to get any of these elements out, what you need to do is to go to the Share menu and you go to Export Song to Disk. And you have the choice when you do that. You can do it in 4 different formats. You can do a couple of compressed formats, AAC and MP3, and a couple of uncompressed formats, WAV and AIFF. In the uncompressed formats, you have the choice of either 16 or 24-bit. And for the compressed files, the AAC and MP3, you can go from 64 kilobits per second up to 256. If you'd like to save a higher res version, a 24-bit WAV file or AIFF file for yourself, that's fine. But for the submission, make that a 192 kilobit per second stereo MP3 file. It'll sound good and it'll take up less room on my hard drive. So simply name the file, your name, Project 2 or P2, direct where to save it, either the desktop or if you have a particular specific folder you're saving these projects, go ahead and put it there, and then click export and you should be good. And here's what the piece sounds like. Then in Canvas, go back to the project panel, click Submit Assignment, attach the MP3 file you just made, and submit, and you're done. Be sure to save this project, both for your portfolio and in case there may be an issue with what you submitted, so you can redo it if necessary. It won't take up that much space because most of these are short MIDI loops, and the files are probably going to be fairly small. And again, this will be a .band file, and save it where you normally would save these kind of files. So what you can take away from this project is now you know how to create very quickly a piece of underscore music that you can loop and you can put underneath the project you're working on. You don't have to go searching for royalty-free music unless you really want to. And you'll always have something that will be a little bit unique because the music is unique. It's not the same piece of music that anybody else may have used.